Look at that. Our friends are here. Welcome to Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining me is the Reverend Tracy. And this week we have another interesting topic as we dive into Education Month. Reverend Tracy, tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. So today, our big question is going to be, why do some learning strategies work while others don't? And essentially, the whole spine of this biz today is learning doesn't happen when information enters your brain. And we're going to talk a bit about how that actually works then. It happens when your brain has to work with that information. So I learned a bunch today. Kind of been fun to nerd out about this, especially with my bonus son still around as he's leading up to going back to school and wants to fancy himself maybe a young Sheldon spinoff himself, talking about how learning works, some of the misconceptions around it. So this one might be a little bit more geared to people who are in school, or heck, even parents out there as you've got kids re-entering the workforce, as it were, the education force, as they all head back to school here very soon.
Or I would say for the simply curious person. I mean, if as we talked about last week with learning and whatnot, learning doesn't stop when you're out of school. So it's possible, I think, that maybe for the curious person, they'll be able to get some nuggets of information too.
Very fair, like especially if you're interested right now, it's becoming all the rage of dropping your screens for physical hobbies again, those grandma hobbies. They like to make a turnaround. This is where I get really popular for knowing how to crochet. So, yeah, just going to jump into it. So, Tim, question for you. Think about the last time you crammed for something, right? Like, I think we've all done it at some point, no matter what your interest in. A test for school, a line read if you're a creative or an actor out there, or whatever it is. And it felt like it was working. You were flying through the material and it felt great, like it's clicking. Yes, I understand these concepts. But now think about how much of that you can actually remember today, right? There's this weird gap between what feels like learning in the moment and what actually sticks. And honestly, that gap is kind of going to be a lot of this episode today.
Well, that's like what most of high school for me. I remember Spanish class, cramming for that, thinking, "Oh my God, I'm going to learn a great new language." And then, hola. That's probably the height of my Spanish speaking skills at the moment.
Hola, ¿dónde estás mis pantalones? That being said, that is the joke phrase that I have chosen to say is the only Spanish I know. That is actually not true anymore. But being a kid in Texas, I actually was going to say yes. I feel Spanish was the perfect example, or really like anything in history class for me. It just became this funny memorization game for me, and I learned nothing. Like, I more found creative ways to memorize a list for a short period of time than I did actually learning anything. So, and in a weird way, I did learn something, just not the goal material.
Yeah, and I get why we have to study those classes in grade school, high school, and college, and all that stuff. But there is a lot of information that we get thrown our way during those years that at the end of the day, you're just not going to remember or care about.
Right. And like, really, what's kind of a bummer, like learning about basically how we learned for this episode, is I guess those study strategies that feel the best while you're doing them are the ones that work the least effectively. The ones that feel like a slog, unfortunately, it's out there. There's no hack to it. Those are the things that tend to work for the long term. So it goes back to, oh yeah, I think we can all relate to either a class in school, or even like, I'm sure there's stuff that even applies at work, right? Like sometimes you have those little training things and you have to get like so much percent, if you don't have the office culture that's secretly handing the answers to all of the quizzes under the desks between each other. Hashtag not going to say which job that was, because that was a medical one and I'm pretty sure that was a big violation of some things.
Whoops.
Yeah, I did not partake in that one. I did not participate, but I was aware it was happening, and I there was some blind eye-age that maybe I turned without reporting it. But granted, we didn't directly work with anybody; it was in the building, so I feel less bad about that one. But but yeah, let's not even start with strategies yet. right? Because I feel like we've all had, like I said, we build those things, whether it actually worked for learning it is like probably not a good case for it, but it seems like we've all learned potentially some learning and some memorization strategies. But we're going to start further back than that. And this was fun because I get to nerd out a little bit more neurologically, which is something I don't know as much about, but is a big interest to me because I just feel there's so much tie into psychology. But we're going to look at what's actually happening inside the brain as we go into this stuff and the moment a memory gets made in the first place. Okay, so this was equally frustrating and fascinating for me, like right off the bat to learn. My brain doesn't work like a camera or a hard drive, Tim. I was so bummed. I have always kind of dreamed that maybe I was just missing the USB port of where I could just plug in information. Or like maybe if I found just the right amount of repetitions of listening to something in the background while I do 20,000 things, that I can just learn through osmosis. But no, it's not filing away a perfect copy of anything that happened, which is funny because we've talked about this even as a mental health space conversation, right? That our memory is incredibly flawed. So, of course, it wouldn't magically work differently just because we're learning something versus experiencing something. So, every time you remember something, your brain is actually rebuilding it. It's pulling pieces together from different places too. There's this idea from cognitive psychology called levels of processing. And it basically says that the more you connect new information to stuff you already know, the deeper it gets encoded and the easier it is to pull back later. Shallow processing, like your eyes just moving across a page, barely leaves a trace at all. So it goes back into, I think, if we understand like how to make those connections. And it's funny because I think we do this sometimes, right? Like, how many times have you met somebody new? Like, for example, Chris, because everybody knows my brother's name, the Bishop Chris. I have met so many Chris's in my life, and my brain will go, oh, like my brother. And it's those little things that sometimes can help you remember somebody's name versus, say, the name of somebody who you've never met before, like, or a name that you don't come across as often, for example. You might have a harder tie in. That was kind of like that instant, immediate example. I thought, I was like, oh, okay, right? Like, I do that when I meet people sometimes, or if I can tie it like something cutesy to like, Chris from the corner store or whatever, so that I can remember it. Like if you can find those tie-ins, we typically have an easier time.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do that at work with the dogs, with the nicknames I give them. A number of them I've given nicknames. Some of them are cute, some of them are stupid, some I wouldn't want to say to the parents, but they at least make me remember which dog I'm specifically thinking about because, not all of them come every day or even every week. So being able to remember them, remember their personalities really helps when they are there.
Right. And exactly, like something as simple as names, we do this with, very common. But yet, when we're trying to learn stuff, I feel like oftentimes we forget that making those little tricks really make it stick. Because I can't tell you, like, even with a physical craft, how much, like, I'll think I've learned how to do something, and then it'll be a gap for a while, and I will have totally forgotten some pivotal step to it. Right. And one of the interesting things, like on the neurological level of how we learn, was learning that memory does have stages. And it kind of makes sense for some of the adages that you hear, like learn, do, teach. Have you heard that one? You're nodding. But yeah, so I feel like there's some adages out there with learning that might even make more sense once we understand how the brain processes information. But basically, memory's got stages. There's encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. And most learning problems apparently happen at encoding, in that we never really actually processed it, right? This goes back to, if your eyes are skimming across a page, you're not really absorbing that information. You're making progress in the perceived task of reading, but you're not really taking it in. Or it happens during that last stage, consolidation, meaning that it never got locked in, right? So you never found a way to entice your brain enough to make that an easy retrieved piece of information. And so it's not really some mysterious step later. We don't just forget things while we're sleeping. Actually, it's really good for our memory to get quality sleep. That ties into this too. But yeah, it's actually happening either with how we're taking in the information or how we're not actually going to that consolidation piece. Right. So basically, hippocampus is a staging area. The cortex is longer term storage, and info moves from one to the other over hours, not days. So, right, this is like realizing that you need to kind of go through those steps. Right. And you can't necessarily speed through it either because your brain does kind of need time to process that.
So no last minute cramming, kids.
No, no last minute cramming. I do think it goes into it later that there's some studies that have very much shown that last minute cramming is just you apparently, and like I said, if the studies are down here, I've actually cited what they were. But the thing that I'm remembering rattling around in my meat computer live right now is that cramming for a test and long form studying bears similar results for the test. So if your goal is to just pass a test, okay, you can cram and pass a test. That's a thing. I get it. In college, there's classes that your only interest is getting an A, right? And it goes back if you're trying to maintain your cognitive load for certain things, there is usefulness to this is my argument. That it is actually okay to forget shit for stuff that doesn't matter ultimately. So I actually took away that it's not useless to cram. I'm going to make the argument right here that I think my takeaway was that it's not useless. It's useful if you're trying to like really focus on, I don't know, maybe you're trying to become a doctor and biology is more important for you to nail and understand long term.
Also, too, I mean, I kind of touched upon. I mean, there are a number of classes during your educational experience that, yeah, you just need to take to be able to get to the next stage of what you really want. But that doesn't mean you can't take something from them. Like you mentioned, history class. You know, history for you wasn't, a career choice that you were going to dive into or anything like that. But having said that, if if your teachers were any good, at the very least, you still learned something, if that makes sense, and you did step away from that class with more knowledge than you may have had before, even though it didn't necessarily stick around in the brain.
Right. Like you might not remember everything from your electives, but that's still going to expose you to different cultures. We've talked about that in some of our previous episodes that that's kind of pretty important to read like different things from different perspectives, take different courses. But that doesn't mean you need to like give it the same level, I guess, of committing it to your long-term stores. Right? Like you can get an impression from something and not necessarily remember the author and the exact quote from the literature that you were doing in the class. And I guess that was where I was like, oh, okay, so cramming is useful, but not for the stuff that you really want to take for long term time. And then the only go deep I'm going to do, there's some interesting stuff going out of the University of Toronto back in the 70s, apparently, but I'm going to focus on Craik and Lockhart's work. But it's Fergus Craik and Robert Lockhart. And they weren't running a single experiment here. What they did is they wrote a theoretical paper reviewing the existing memory literature and made the case against the popular quote unquote multi-store model of memory. So basically, these guys helped us upgrade understanding how our brains even work for memory. So this isn't new news, right? These have been challenged since the 70s. But the idea, so the multi-store model basically is the idea that information just moves in order through separate short-term, long-term storage bins, almost like a computer, right? Instead, they argued memory strength depends on how deeply information gets processed. From shallow, which we hinted on a little bit earlier, right? Just noticing what a word looks like or sounds like on a paper, to deep, which is thinking about what it means and connecting it to what you know. Why it matters here, though, is it's the theoretical backbone for basically the whole of everything, the enchilada that we're going to go into. That if depth of processing is what drives memory, that explains why effortful strategies like retrieval and teaching beat passive ones like just rereading it over and over. Just recording yourself saying it. I fell into this so much in college of, oh, if I just record myself reading this book, A, I get credit because I read it. B, I'm going to listen to it nonstop while I sleep. And yeah, maybe that did help in a cram method, right? But now we're learning like just sitting here reading it over and over is not really how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing that back in the day too with with my old trusty cassette player. I would record like test questions and answers, for studying and all that to try to memorize them. But put a gun to my head today and be like, "What were they, Tim? Don't know. I don't even remember the specific class, but I know I did it."
Yep. And then what's funny is this is again, it's all dealing with memory and making connections. And this even goes into what we've talked about before with eyewitness testimony being so bad, right? Because your connection, your focus in that moment is surviving, understandably, and it's not necessarily making sure you associate where that mole was on their right cheek. And granted, I'm not saying all eyewitness testimony is garbage. That's not the case, but it has been proven that it's not necessarily as effective as we want it to be in the moment.
Yeah, I brought this up in the due process episode, but did I ever tell you about the time I was robbed?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it was when I was working at a third shift at a gas station in Grand Rapids, and it happened 3 times. But the second time is what is important here for the story. Guy came in with a BB gun, and I knew it was a BB gun because I'd seen that before. But I'm not taking a BB gun to the face or anything like that for someone else's money. So he got the money, he ran out, and I ran outside to see what type of vehicle he was in, and it was, to me in the moment, it was a white truck with black trim. Now that's important, So the police ended up doing their thing, arresting the guy and towing the truck in, and the police actually brought me into the police station, and I ended up seeing the truck, and the truck was a white truck with red trim. It was the exact same truck. But my head in the moment was like, it has black trim. And that's what I told the officers at the moment. And it's like, you get a horrible feeling doing that, but it's just your brain in the moment, to your point. Yeah.
Right.
Even though I knew it was a BB gun and I wasn't fearful for my life, it was still a tense situation because, who knows what the, guy could have done if I like tried to grab the BB gun, for instance.
Right. And that also just shows the power of when you think you got something memorized, but you don't, right? Because I think what comes from the knowledge that we can share about this is that when things are important, you need to find those ways to make the connections and focus on the memory of it. Not, oh, I saw that once and I got it. That is viciously ineffective for our brains. You do not recommend banking on that one. But yeah, right. But you can see, like, we're understanding that you can actually take that moment, hopefully anchor logically, and go, oh no, this is important. So I really need to drill home. What does that license plate say? Oh, wait, no, we're not good at things past a certain number of letters, especially when it doesn't make sense. So if you can't, like, hey, it says abraca or something like that, that's easy for you, then you have to find other things that you can identify more solidly, right? So that's where I kind of take like this kind of comfort in understanding how our brains work. Because even then, you can also kind of start understanding the importance of journaling, right? And I know, like, talking about shared memories and how that works too. We've had the few laughs about the story with me and the Bishop Chris, where we had the whole epic fight over a bagel dog one morning, and we remember it totally different up until the end. And I swear both of us would bet on our lives that our version is how it happened. But neither of us were journalers at the time, so our memories are all we can go off of. But yeah, but that's like the takeaway, I guess, is so if memory gets built through connection and effort instead of just exposure, right? Because we go back to you were exposed to the truck. You did nothing other than, yep, I was exposed to this, and I'm gonna think I've got it locked in from there. And that does happen with like people that don't understand when they misidentify an assailant that was literally inches from their nose. But yet it happens. Like so much to the tune of entirely different skin color happens, right? Like these things, feel free to research that one. It happens. It happens enough that you can probably find at least 2 or 3 examples where DNA evidence revealed, no, it was way not that person. It was this entirely different person that looks so different. It's almost like you question that person. right? You question their integrity when you don't understand how memory works. That person gets branded as, oh, you must have lied, when really it's way more complicated than that.
And there are definitely stories too, and obviously not for every single instance, but there are definitely stories to where police officers, when they have a certain suspect in mind, can gear their questioning to the witness in such a way to where they're thinking, yeah, maybe it was that person.
Right. And now to give some credit where it's due, that is not always done with poor intent. Sometimes these guys know that this person is a bad person. Or it's not always good intent either, because there's some, I think it's Steve Avery is that guy's name, and every now and then I remember him and try to look up and see, because I think he's straight, is just IMHO. That dude got framed. That dude got hella framed, and then he got framed again. But anyway, that's a whole Netflix documentary you can take on yourself. But yeah, like it happens too, where it's like they know this person's a bad person and they're just so sure that's who it is. So it's not always with like the poor intent of like officers are always bad, right? Like I think we've talked about that enough, that Siths deal in absolutes. That the fact of the matter is most officers, I know we don't like to hear this nowadays, it seems, are pretty good people who want to serve their community. And that's like, go to a national night out and challenge yourself if you've got other feelings, because I do feel like most of them are pretty nice people trying to do well. But yeah, like, so memory, big examples, innocent examples, like childhood memories even. So that being said, I feel like what raises the very obvious question then is, if it takes more effort than just exposure, what's actually the best, most well supported way to force that kind of connection to happen? And good news is there's apparently a clear answer for this. So if there's one finding I'd want every student, and to your point, every adult that wants to continue learning, to walk away with, it's this: rereading your notes does not work. What actually works is forcing yourself to pull the information out of your own head before you check whether you're right. And that's called retrieval practice. And there's a famous study where students who quizzed themselves on material remembered way more a week later than students who just reread it over and over, even though the rereaders felt more confident going in. So confidence is not always key, folks. And retrieval practice is fun because, and I do think my notes will help me like blend this in a little bit better. This is one of the cooler things to take away from this one is not being wrong is actually part of the learning process. Forgetting stuff is part of the learning process. And that's what this is going to kind of help us understand, like, why that is, because the retrieval process is also called the testing effect. And it works even when you get the answer wrong at first, as long as you attempt the retrieval before seeing the answer. So don't just flip to the back of the card. Like, part of that practice is literally your brain kind of, think of it almost like a path in the forest, right? Like there might be a little inkling of a trail there and you're unsure, but the more you try to like tread that path, the more clear it's going to get for your brain. So, yeah, even if you take a step off to the side and then you realize, oh man, I'm not on my trail anymore, let's get back over on this. The more you practice going that trail, you're going to know, oh, at that little rock, no, don't step to the right, keep going left. Right? You guys are like trying to bring the analogies, and since I'm a hiker, that was kind of one of my natural ones. Is the more you walk a path, the easier it's going to get. It appears that our brain does the same things, because that's part of why flashcards are so effective. They force retrieval. As long as you're not immediately flipping it and you're trying to make your brain remember what's on the other side, and it's not even because of the repetition itself, right? Because if that were the case, you wouldn't ever need to struggle and try to think of it. You could just flip it and just do rereads. So, rereading creates a false sense of progress because it feels smooth, and that smoothness is a trap. Okay, so one super nerdy little thing I'll go into is just this work from Rodinger and Kerpick, and this is from 2006 from Washington University in St. Louis. And basically, they had college students study short prose passages. One group took a practice test on the material right after studying, recalling as much as they could without any feedback. Another group just reread the material the same number of times. Then everyone was tested again, either 5 minutes, 2 days, or a week later. So they really tried to spread this out for anybody who nerds out over testing methods, right? Kind of interesting way of doing it. At 5 minutes, the rereaders actually did slightly better. But on the 1 week test, the group that had practiced retrieval remembering basically that whole process, they remembered substantially more. Like, so the retrieval practice, right, that they got it taken away and did it immediately. Even though right after studying, the rereaders had rated themselves as more confident that they had remembered the material. Okay, so why this matters here is this is the single clearest piece of evidence that testing yourself beats passive review. That, right, trying to recall it, making your brain try to work the path of the other side of that flashcard and not falling to the temptation of just flipping it over for that feel good answer, right? And the confidence mismatch is exactly the feels like learning versus actual learning gap that we're kind of covering is kind of the problem with how we think about learning, right? Because it goes back to how confident do you feel after cramming for a test and then walking in there and being like, yeah, I got this. Versus, I guess, apparently, if we got tested 2 weeks later, we'd probably fail that same test.
Yeah, and it does seem like, at least with the retrieval process, it sounds like that is going to work more the more you do it, and in terms of not waiting until the last damn minute to study, you know.
Right, exactly. And by the way, like obviously this has more application than just formal exams, right? Retrieval practice is any moment you try to produce an answer from memory, be it a flashcard, a conversation, or even trying to recall a plot point from your favorite movie out loud, right? It goes back to like when you don't watch something for a long time and don't recall it to yourself, you can totally make up scenes in movies. You can totally make up characters sometimes. Like even like look at the Ed McMahon thing. That was like a whole societal you won the publishers clearinghouse that everybody thinks that happened, but it didn't, because I guess we didn't refresh ourselves that that was just a gimmick that started being made in shows, that he never did the clearinghouse sweepstakes. Just there's interesting stuff to learn about how our memory works. But I guess it got peppered in so much that we all think it's true. But yeah, so ultimately, I think what was neat was that the research on productive failure suggests students who even guess wrong on a problem before being taught the right way can end up understanding it better than students who were just taught it directly. Being wrong first can be a feature, not a bug, because we're going to come back to it, right? And it's funny because it goes back to I was always really shit at math. And I remember I went to like my first run at college, took a break, wound up at this community college outside Scottsdale Community College in Arizona. Shout out. And there was a math teacher there that instead of just, hey, this is the problem. So when you have these variables, this is the formula, and da 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 da. She like opened it as a conversation so that we could try to like, hey, so how would you figure this out? And I think that is the first time a math class ever connected with me. So it was really kind of interesting because even though we were wrong, like a lot of the guesses were wrong, right? Like this is like some college algebra something, because I'd started over because I was like, well, I'm shit at math anyway. And if this counts for my math credits, I don't care. But it was such a nice exposure for me to be like, oh, okay, there actually are ways to approach math that's not just the long memorization game, which doesn't work for a lot of people. And I think that's why traditionally, like math, like people who are good at math, were kind of a smaller set for a while. And it's like, well, no, duh. Now that we understand that most people don't learn the way that it seems math was traditionally taught, no wonder not a lot of people are that great at math, because it's almost like doing the opposite of all of the stuff that works for learning. Not letting you guess, not letting you like figure out the clunky way of it making sense, to make a connection to understand how it works rather than just reading a formula and this is what you use. Because I go back to, man, did I struggle through like most of my math classes like growing up. And it was just, like I said, really interesting to for somebody to take a totally different tack. And I guess like if you're struggling with learning something, in a class, if it's a silly little course you've paid for, like just because you're going back to school, or if it's just an online thing that you're trying to learn, go find different teachers, because sometimes you can find the person that can click to you. Like, hopefully your professor isn't going to be offended if you want to go check out Khan Academy, for example, because that's a very good example, especially like with some of the math and sciences, I want to say, of finding a different interesting resource that might help gear you to learning something in a different way. But yeah, so finding those different ways of processing information for yourself. If your teacher's not working and you really want to learn something, try finding a different teacher to see if somebody can help you find a way to make those connections in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, there's more than one way to teach a course or something like that, and you can have some people that are best geared towards people that learn one way, and if you can find that other person that can teach you just a different way to get to the same endpoint that you want to get to, then by all means take advantage of that. The resources
Yeah.
are generally out there.
Yep. And if you can find a way, testing yourself beats rereading, right? So if you can even find a way just to work that retrieval process with whatever it is you're learning, struggle with it. If it's a craft and you're looking up how to do a stitch, try to do the stitch or whatever. I say this because I'm a crocheter, right? Crochet is actually kind of one of those. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, and there's a lot of little like shorthands for stuff. But at least trying and even doing it wrong, being like, that doesn't look right, that still serves a very good purpose. And it's funny because I go back to, I'm kind of persnickety and a bit of a perfectionist when I do stuff, and I get really fussy when it's not done right the first time. But it turns out it's actually better for learning long term for me to mess up. Ah, that's hard to say, but it just is.
Yeah, if only I could keep that in mind when it comes to the guitar.
So yeah, I think that's where people get tripped up. I don't think I'm the only person that has like that perfectionist brain, right? Like I almost feel the cognitive dissonance feelings to me saying it's important to get it wrong. It's funny, right? It goes back to even when we've talked about identity. A lot of us like think that we're intelligent people. And I think part of that can kind of affect our ability to be okay with being wrong. So I'm going to try to pitch it a little bit further for stubborn brains like me that still like, no, it's better if I get it right every time. Like, yeah, sure. I should still try to like tread the forest, but I should only ever get it right. So I'm never taking a right step at the rock, Tim, right? Because it sounds counterintuitive, but there's a concept from memory research. This is from Robert Bjork. Sorry,
Bjork,
I just love some of the Bjork
Bjork, Bjork, Bjork.
call. And it's called desirable difficulties and certain kinds of friction during learning. Spacing your study sessions out over days instead of cramming, or mixing up topics instead of studying one thing in a block, slow you down and feel harder in the moment, but massively improve what you actually remember weeks later. The catch is the word desirable. Confusing confusing badly explained material isn't desirable difficulty. It's just difficulty. This is specifically friction that forces your brain to keep working. So I think a lot of that is talking about the quality of your teaching and the quality of your stuff too. And the ability to kind of block out and go in between things. This is like some of the stuff that I feel like people get frustrated with. And I think some of that does tie into some of those biases in our brain, right? The simplicity bias and the idea that we've talked about it before, and even at the top of this, our brain isn't really just a storage unit, right? It's not something that we just download information. And things that we've talked about before with some of the bias traps is it's an efficiency model, right? Like our brain just wants to learn the thing and get done. And I think that's why we feel like those cram sessions and only focusing on one thing and like hyper focus is the way to do it. I think some of that is that trap of our brain just wanting it to be efficient and saying it's as simple as cram and study this, right? But spacing, and that's studying over multiple sessions across days, beats massing, which is that cramming in one sitting. And that's for long term retention. And even when both produce identical scores the next day on a test, right? So if you're using testing, this was like the stuff that I was talking about earlier that was kind of funny and frustrating. Um, but yeah, like that is where you might even accidentally be rewarding yourself, right? Because what have we learned about habit formation is that when we perceive that it pays out and has a predictable result, we are more likely to maintain that habit. So, what I guess I'm saying is, I think unfortunately, our education system has taught us that cramming pays because we're getting those test scores back. Even though when we get tested, right, like think about like the stuff that you got aces all year on, and then you get to your midterm, and then suddenly you're struggling to get a B or a C because we've had the entire term of getting this kind of feedback of, oh, this is paying. I'm cramming, I'm acing these quizzes. I'm cramming, I'm acing these little tests. This is paying out. And then suddenly, every once in a while, it's not. So if you think about how we form habits, it's almost like our education system, as well meaning as it is to try to see how kids are absorbing information all along, may accidentally be making a misstep in this constant quiz and constant test mentality.
Well, I think if you think about it too, though, it does speak to the type of studying practices that the student in question has as well. Because to your point, if someone is consistently making time every single day to go over this material by the time the testing time comes, compared to somebody that does an all-nighter the night before the test and drinks like 20 Red Bulls to be able to get through that experience, it's like it seems like the person that does take the time over many days to study the material is going to learn it more. I mean, because think about learning how to play a song on a guitar. You are going to be better at playing that song if you practice over multiple days compared to a cramming session. Now, better in a relative sense. I'm not saying you're going to sound like Eddie Van Halen or something like that, but putting in that consistent practice is going to make it much easier for you to be able to go from note to note to note compared to going through that last minute cramming session. I mean, and again, you still may be able to complete the song after cramming, but good luck remembering it, 2 weeks down the road.
And then don't forget the whole interleaving thing, right? When you're mixing problems and going between stuff. Like that even goes to, yeah, practice a song a few times, but you do kind of need to break it up and practice other songs in between, or you're going to forget the other songs. Hashtag, like it also will help you back with your retrieval process because it goes back to replaying and replaying, I would think would effectively be the same thing as rereading. So if we're going to try to make parallels to the studies and what they actually looked at, and understanding that our brain does kind of work similarly across whatever it is, I would say just replaying the same song over and over would be very close to just focusing on the same stuff. And so, right, like difficulty is generally good for you. Right. Unfortunately, that is kind of the thing. And I think one of the nice parallels or an analogy to take it to is working out, right? We talked about Arnie before. The first time he picked up a heavy weight, it wasn't just like picking it up like it was nothing. There was struggle because nobody expects lifting weights to feel comfortable. Because if it does, you're not working that muscle. And it's kind of the same thing with our brain and how it processes information, it turns out. Because that difficult feeling of, oh man, I was just doing this kind of problem set and now so the interleaving, right? And now I'm like going to do this and I'm going to feel my brain switch and that's going to be difficult. But feeling that difficulty can genuinely be good for learning, but only certain kinds and only on purpose, right? Like it goes back to it can't just be difficult for the sake of difficult. It can't be like you can't be struggle busing through poor material. So this is also where it does matter, like the quality of the stuff that you're using does matter. And it does, like, all of this kind of brings up something worth naming directly. And that is if the best learning methods feel hard, why does almost everything about how we're taught to study point us towards the easy, comfortable stuff instead? And this goes back to I do love our public education. I love and appreciate our teachers. I don't think this is necessarily me saying that they're bad. But I think like talking about it, it's kind of making it a little clear to see like why learning maybe gets progressively harder as kids go up through the years. Right? Because like even in high school, I feel like it used to be more prescriptive of like what you took in an order. And now I feel like high school is almost a little bit more like college light. So you can take a term off of taking a math class. And then therefore, you're taking an entire term out of the retrieval process. And I get it. Like you want to teach some responsibility and stuff too. But when we're not teaching how memory works and allowing kind of those missteps during high school, I sometimes wonder if that's good intention, but maybe not the best direction.
I get that. I mean, it does to me. I guess it would depend on the student. Like, if you're not going in for like a math degree, or if your career goals aren't something that heavily relies upon math, then maybe that's not as big of an issue. But if it's something you're going to have to come back to again at a later point, having that year off would not be the best type of vacation that a student would need.
Exactly. So basically, all of that to say, spacing things out, mixing topics. It feels harder, but it works better than cramming and blocking. So, yes, if you want to master something, by all means, you should be giving it the focus time, but also make sure you're taking breaks and maybe interweaving it or interleaving it between other things. Okay, so here was something also interesting because I think we've all heard the term learning styles before. Have you heard of that before? Like, right between being a visual or an auditory learner, I guess, are the top two examples.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right, like that learning is somehow magically matched to your style, and that's your job to figure out what that style is. But there's actually a psychological term for what researchers went looking for here, and it's called the meshing hypothesis. And after decades of looking for evidence that matching style to teaching method improves learning, they just haven't found it. So I think it's one of those things that it kind of sounded like that it made sense, right? That aha, the simplicity bias thing that it tickles. But what the research shows is it's something more interesting than that though, right? Because it's more interesting than just being as easy as half the time when we decide that something's wrong that we were like have glammed onto, because I do feel like the concept of learning styles kind of got glammed onto. But the discomfort you feel while learning something hard is often a sign that your brain is doing real work. So it does kind of go back to the muscle analogy and lifting weights. It's not a sign that something's wrong. And I think that's something that, again, kind of accidentally got taught in our schooling when we think about it. That, especially maybe our age group, maybe it's better now because I've been out of kind of the, K through 12 for a minute. But I kind of remember there being a sense of shame if you got something wrong, and that it was kind of no secret that the teacher was like, well, you got that wrong. But right, like I think you can probably remember that feeling too. If you felt, do you feel like your teachers, like when you were growing up, because you're about 10 years older than me, I think. Do you feel that they were more accepting and embracing of when you made a mistake, or was there kind of this shame that if you did not know the answer, do not raise your hand?
I mean, generally, I kept that attitude. That the second part, I kept that attitude in class most of the time, but it did depend upon the teacher. Being honest, there were some teachers that were cool and wanted you to learn this stuff and understood that people were going to make mistakes along the way. But then you would have your hard asses, generally the older teachers, the
Mhm.
ones who, in my case, their heyday was like the 70s or something like that. Those people were different to deal with, and I'm glad I don't have to deal with them anymore.
Yeah, like, especially being raised in Texas, I feel like we're 20 years behind everybody and everything. And it was almost like they didn't want you to put the incorrect answer in the air, right? Because it seems so simple to them. Like, of course, you don't want the students to hear a wrong answer. You only want them to hear the right answer. But the thing is we know more now that maybe hearing the wrong answer and working out being wrong as a group actually would have done more for students actually being able to retrieve, because that discomfort during learning, that you're struggling to remember, you're trying to answer a question, even being put on the spot, as much as I fudging hated that as a kid, of a teacher going, actually, you are going to answer this question, and here's the question. Like, you're not even going to give me the opportunity to like raise my hand or not. And what stinks is that teacher, as mean as that felt sometimes, did more for my learning than letting me just volunteer whether or not I knew it. Right? Because whether I wanted to answer it or not, my brain is still going to try really hard for a second to think of whether or not I even know the answer and therefore like practice that retrieval. So it kind of sucks because you even go into parents teaching kids, right? Like we don't ask kids that very natural, almost like thing of like asking a question that you know the answer to. Right? It's not mean when you understand that that's really a natural way of trying to get them to do that retrieval. And it does depend on your attitude behind it, right? Though, like, hey, I told you something this morning, what was it? Can be used toxically or it can be used to help with retrieval. And it's up to you as a parent, the attitude you put behind it on a parenting teaching level.
Yeah, side tangent here, but this is a story that one of my favorite teachers in high school told me. He mentioned that there was one term to where he was teaching American history and was got to the point of talking about World War II. But to see if the students were paying attention, he started teaching World War II as if the Germans won,
Oh
and
no.
it went on for 3 days until one of the students said, "Didn't we win?" You know?
That is super funny. Meanwhile, my history teacher's hack for getting us to not pay attention but stay awake was just to make his room always super cold.
Yeah, that
So, I
does
mean,
keep. Yeah.
everybody's got their tactics, right? Yours was at least a little bit more creative because somebody had to eventually recall it's like, this is not correct. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know. Did you ever buy that you were a visual or an auditory learner? Because I'm even catching that I believe this about myself for a certain time. And I don't know. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it because is it not you finding the way that you're able to make the connection? So I have some like internal pushback and almost want to learn a little bit more about the resistance to visual versus auditory. But I do think maybe the point is that we're all visual to a point, right? Because it's about practicing it and making some form of connection, not just listening to it.
Yeah, really. I mean, like I said, I've heard about that before. Depending on the topic, it depends for me. There are some things that I do learn best by, like putting on like a YouTube video, for instance, and, going through like a step by step. This is how you do X, Y, and Z. But there are also some things to where I can pick up a book and read that book. And then by the end of it, I know what I need to know and I'm able to go from there. So, ultimately, again, it does depend on the particular topic in question, which I think, shows why, these quote unquote learning styles are kind of BS at the end of the day. To your point, simplicity bias. It's like there is some truth to it, but it's not the whole answer, if that makes sense.
Right, and that's like the most effective way that somebody believes because it's that confirmation bias in a sense, stacked on top of it, right? Because you've got the simplicity of, oh, it's just as easy as I need to find the way to absorb information. And then you mix that with confirmation bias of like, oh, well, these things support that, or the times that it does work. But really, everything seems to point to if it feels easy and familiar, be suspicious because that feeling isn't the same as actually learning it. And also, you have to keep in mind too, like what the topic is, right? I would think that that would have more to do. And I guess like my takeaway here is maybe we are all a mix of visual and auditory, that there are just some things that you will have to kind of blend if you want to learn it. It just kind of depends on if you've happened to feel that listening to stuff has worked enough. It goes back into challenging, but did it work all the time? Because if it didn't work all the time, I could see it being super frustrating of when you really want to learn something and it not working for that thing and you just being convinced that you can't learn that thing then.
You got to be willing to try anything, right? And if watching like a YouTube video is not going to teach you what you need to know, then maybe pull that book down off the bookshelf and give it a read to see if that will work for you. And if that doesn't work, try something else.
Yeah, and like obviously feeling confident about the information apparently is not really a tell-all as to whether you understand it or not.
With the good old American confidence.
Yep, yep, you can be confidently wrong. Okay, so I think we've talked to death. The one of the bigger takeaways with learning is apparently it's kind of important to struggle and be wrong while you're learning. If it feels really easy, there's probably a misstep. So I want to go into something else that I feel like we do talk a lot about in general. Because we've talked about it when it comes to mental health, and it's one of those things that you can do for yourself that seems to protect a lot of things, and that is sleep. Right? Because let's unpack that because sleep is not just your brain shutting off, right? I know we seem to like to think of our brains as a computer. I jokingly and lovingly call mine my meat computer, right? It doesn't just shut off and then file things and like if you're a real nerd, do a defrag or a consolidation or whatever of your files, right? That's not what necessarily happens. During sleep, your brain replays patterns of activity from the day and moves memories from short term storage into longer term storage. And different stages of sleep seem to help with different kinds of memory. And here's the part that should genuinely worry anyone who's pulled an all nighter. Sleep deprivation doesn't just make you tired, it actually does impair your hippocampus's ability to encode brand new memories the next day. So, not only are you taking away a vital piece of memory consolidation and like what we need to do is sleep so that memory works, you're going to impair your ability to remember stuff the next day. So, what's interesting about that is like, yeah, Tim, do you remember having cram sessions in college where maybe like we didn't sleep well for nights in a row? I mean, not you and I collectively at the same time, but I know we both went through higher education where maybe a little bit more was left up to our whimsy than teachers in high school that maybe kept us a little bit more in line with a study schedule and quizzes. So yeah, like let's talk about that experience. How many times do you think we've completely trashed and unnecessarily failed a test because we thought it was great to like stay up late 3 nights in a row and just cram sesh?
I have definitely done that. And yeah, to what you just said there, those tests did not come out that well. And it was on my it was my fault that it happened because I didn't put the time in consistently over the weeks of that class to do the proper studying. It's not like I was completely ignoring it, of course, but it was a situation where I thought, oh, I could take care of that later, and then later became the day before the test, and it was just like,
Oh,
oh
yeah.
shit. Um,
Tale as old as time. I feel like it's such a relatable experience because I think we've all made that misstep. I mean, not all. Obviously, there are some people that, were privileged enough to put together healthy study habits and maybe didn't fall into these traps. But I feel like it's probably relatable. I think it would be safe to say even your smartest of people has done this at least once or made this misstep at least once.
and I think,
And
yeah, and I
I
think
was just gonna say that the funniest thing really quick that I've ever done was I forgot to put my last name on my test, like talking about how it actually impairs. I did well on the test. I think like for me, I got like a high B or whatever. But because the big takeaway was I did not study at all for it. And I like leading up to I think 2 days before, and I decided to pull an all nighter because I didn't want to sleep and forget anything. I pulled an all nighter the night before and then continued to study and then took it later that afternoon because it was an afternoon class. So basically, she took off like a couple of points because I didn't put my last name. Fortunately, she knew exactly who I was because it was a small class, but it's like you did not put your name like properly on this form. First and last name, folks. You got to at least do that. So sorry, I just the my relatable experience was like, oh yeah, not only did sure, like I crammed and I passed the test, but what a silly thing to not do correctly because I don't know if this is still a standard, but back all of my college experiences between the few campuses that I graced was you put your full name on the paper. Like period. You need to put your full name as it's rostered on your paper. That's like a bare minimum requirement for turning in anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, if depending on the college, if you got like 300 people in your class, Tracy is a pretty common name, so not putting the last name on would hurt. But what I was going to say is that I think too, if you think about it, the cramming sessions are something that's kind of romanticized. If you think about it, it's one of those things that everybody you hear stories of people talking. Oh, I did this. I had 12 cups of coffee and I got through this and all that. And, maybe understanding that just because something is romanticized doesn't mean you should necessarily go through with it yourself.
Right. And then, so basically, sleep after learning improves retention. The whole thing that you dump information when you fall asleep is complete fallacy. It's not the same as shutting off your computer and forgetting to save that Word document. And that's what I feel like a lot of people, all joking aside, mistakenly think of our brains as a computer and not like an efficiency machine. So, yes, pulling an all nighter to cram undermines two things at once: the encoding of the new material you're studying and the consolidation of what you crammed for the night before, because it goes back to sleeping is an important part of those steps. So, even a nap after learning something new has been linked to measurable memory benefits within just a couple of hours. So even if you wanted to like trade out those blocks by taking a brief nap, that is better than pulling effectively two overnighters leading into an exam, which is what I had done for that midterm. So, yeah, so the one study I want to go into on this one, just for any of those that need that to further say sleep is worth protecting, get your sleep. And I say that by, I think we all now see them almost playing passively in our background of doctors trying to get this message out of turn off your phone an hour before time, or at least like put it on those soft lights and disengage with certain apps, right? So this goes into that little bit deeper message of yeah, sleep, but if you're not getting your sleep, you need to question your sleep hygiene. And so it's not just as simple as hey guys, sleep, because if you're not getting it, it kind of goes into some themes that we talked about before, that sleep is very much worth protecting for multiple levels, for your mental health at a baseline, for your emotional regulation abilities, and then now it turns out for learning. There's a widely cited 2007 study that came out of University of California, Berkeley, and it did get published in Nature Neuroscience, and it's by Matthew Walker and his team. And they kept a group of healthy young adults awake for roughly a day and a half. Sound familiar, guys? Then had them try to learn some new information. So this one was associating faces with names. So I kind of dig that they did this because fun fact that I've learned over time is we're kind of not good with names, like in general. But anywho, while scanning their brain activity at the same time, by the way. So not even just relying on a test, but literally looking at neurologically how well is that brain working? And the sleep deprived group showed a significant drop in hippocampal activity during learning. And their ability to actually remember the new material afterwards suffered accordingly. So now it goes back into this is why I think getting neurology mixed into my psychology is kind of like getting chocolate in my peanut butter, like if you like Reese's, right? Like there's some people that maybe still want to keep it separate, but I'm kind of excited that we seem to have measurable ways to look at this physically and say, no, this has an impact.
And think about it too. I mean, you don't want someone who's been up for a day and a half to be like driving, for instance. So how do you expect someone who, wouldn't perform well, driving a car on, being after being up after a day and a half? How do you expect them to remember information that came with a test? Your brain is at a deficit when you don't have the sleep. And to be clear, again, I'm someone who has crammed it before myself or something. I get that whole mindset of, oh snap, I need to learn this really quick.
Yep.
It's like we put ourselves in that situation, but it doesn't help in the long run just because your body won't take it, and also to think about the people that do want to stay up all night and, think that, oh, I'm going to drink lots of coffee or drink lots of energy drinks or anything like that. And, I can tell you from experience myself, those things will affect your performance too. And you don't want to go down there.
Right. And it goes into kind of that further thing that we like to remind people is we don't live in a bubble, right? So it goes into if it's affecting the hippocampus for something as simple as name retrieval and face name association, what is it doing to all those other little everyday activities and things that we're trying to learn and do every day? Because I guess what really matters from that study of during doing the neurological ability to like scan a brain and read it live action, it's direct evidence that sleep deprivation is not just feeling tired. It goes back to it, right? That's simple. Oh, I'm tired. I feel tired, and that's all the effect. But no, it actually measurably shuts down part of the brain's ability to encode new memories in the first place. And that's just the learning effect. Because now we're getting into it shutting down parts of the brain that is now also going to affect other things like ability to emotionally regulate, etc., which is also kind of important for learning, by the way, right? We don't learn well when we're angry. We don't learn well when we're not regulated. So that's part of it as well. Not only is there a very physical, neurological need for your brain to sleep in order to do functions of what it needs to do to retain long term memory, it's also incredibly important just at a baseline to keep your body healthy and in a good space for learning. And I think this is super important because of kind of what's going on with kids and anxiety. We also kind of have a lot of younger kids that are drinking more caffeine. And if we've learned anything about caffeine, it can really donk with your sleep schedule. So I know we viewed it as this innocent thing to just let them have. And unfortunately, I think that's a little bit of a misstep. And if it's something that we're concerned about, even in our kids or even in ourselves, you've talked openly recently about ditching caffeine or as much coffee or past a certain point, right? And I know you've mentioned feeling the effects of that. So I
Yeah,
think
like
it's, yeah.
I think I don't know if I mentioned this particular instance, but it was like a couple weeks ago. I was editing pretty late, and in the past, I'd made it a habit of, because it was the weekend, I would have a cup of coffee, and I didn't mind on the weekend, but it was a little later, and it got to the point where I finished up at about 10 o'clock at night, and after that, I went to bed about an hour later, and then had the shittiest sleep that I probably had in a long time. And, thanks to my new watch, and I think I did mention this, thanks to my new watch, I was able to see that I got barely any REM sleep. I was able to sleep through the night, let's be clear, but I got little to no REM sleep. And, if you're not getting REM sleep, you're not getting good sleep at all. Now the majority of your sleep is going to be the light sleep. It's not going to be REM. I think you need like at least an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours or something like that. But I got like less than an hour of REM sleep thanks to just having a little bit of coffee too late.
Right. And so when you're trying to learn, you think about those cram sessions, right? You're trying to stay awake and learn. So you're having caffeine, and that's just kind of that slippery slope, right? And gosh, sleep is so important because it's super funny. I don't know if you've ever had it happen where you woke up and then understood something better that you were trying to learn. But I know factually it has happened to the Mr. Reverend where he will be struggling through trying to like work through a concept, right? And then he'll go to sleep. And he has told me before that he solved the problem in his sleep. And that makes a lot of sense with what we just learned about it, right? Like you're not just taking a break, you are repeating things. This is stuff that even in developmental and child psychology of, hey, that could be why babies suckle in their sleep, is that is a skill that they are learning and they're practicing that. So even as early as that, like, and I don't remember if they confirmed somehow that that is what's going on. I just know remember reading as I was kind of understanding the baby reverend being very little, and that being one of those things that people do wonder that because we do kind of know this about our brain as we're older, perhaps it's even that early happening. That sleep is super important because that is such a major time for us to unpack and even practice in our brain some of the things that we were learning, whether we remember that or not.
I would even compare it to like a video game that you're a video game level that you're having a really tough time with. If you're continuously staying on that game and failing that level over and over and over again, you're going to get frustrated. You're going to get upset. And honestly, the best thing to do is to put it down. And I found that, the times that I do find myself facing that, when I put the game down and leave it for a couple hours and come back, I'm able to magically finish that level pretty quickly. If you are getting to the point where you're, studying for something and you're not getting it, you're not getting it, you're not getting it, it is best to take that break. If whether it means, in this case, sleeping, or if it's during the day and you don't want to sleep, maybe go for a bike ride, go grab something to eat, or go do something else and then come back to it, because then your brain has had a chance to take a breath.
And then so I think kind of our bigger takeaway from this one is sleep is not downtime, right? It's when your brain files the day's learning into long-term storage. Crazy important. Skipping it, getting poor quality of it, it costs you literally on both ends of the process, right? It's going to cost you remembering stuff from the day before, and then it's going to cost your ability to retain things into that next day. And we go back into when we are constantly having the caffeine, it almost makes sense that we have kind of some memory issues. Like in that whole cultural wellness aspect that we like to bring in, is it's like we're not in a bubble. So if we're constantly having issues with sleep and we're doing things like being up on our phone up until X time, until X o'clock, even if it's not every night, say it's just 3 nights a week out of the 7, and then say like we are still having caffeine past a certain cutoff time, a couple of days, and it goes back into when we're not in a bubble, then we are always affecting our memory, like at a baseline level. And this isn't even going into other stimulants and downers that we partake in, like kind of normally in our culture, like alcohol. This is just like what I feel is the most innocent and non-demonized one, is caffeine does have an effect on our sleep, right? So protecting our sleep is important. Struggling through the information is important. So it seems like a lot of keys to learning is ditching anything that feels super simple, right? Because boy, is it easier just to succumb to the temptation and be on my phone until 10, 11 at night. Boy, is it easier for me to just say that I want my coffee and I'm going to have it. It actually requires, I guess, discipline to protect your sleep, and that's going to feel difficult in and of itself. But then there's also that needing to embrace the retrieval process. So those are two things we've talked about so far. And then what's nice is if you really want to stack learning into your favor, there is one more thing. So you kind of talked about how to learn it, and then that's like kind of sleep, and then also how to do it, because sleep can even affect your ability to do it. So learn, do, and then of course teach. There actually is some cool studies that support that when we teach something, that it is more likely for that recall and that retention and everything. And now that's not saying that you need to be educated to the level of standing up there as a professor, right? It does seem to include that retrieval process of, say, if you're talking something out with somebody while you're teaching your understanding of it. So you can even kind of understand and take that weight off of, you don't have to have it perfectly down to actually utilize this tool. You can have it like an 80 or 90% solution. Just don't speak with so much confidence, right? Like make sure you're doing those steps and doing the learning alongside your person if you're not like 95 to 100% on your material, right? Like that also kind of folds in intellectual humility required is kind of an asterisk to a lot of the learning process. We've talked about that before. So that's what we'll go into next, is why teaching somebody else actually teaches you. So my favorite part of all of this is like what I said, is when we hear like those kind of like knowledge is good to knows. Even this one isn't ancient knowledge, but I do like hearing something that's sort of an old adage that turns out to kind of be right. right? Like I kind of, there's a little bit of that conservatism in my heart that doesn't want all of the old sayings to be wrong. And so I loved learning that there actually is something behind learn, do, teach. And my favorite part about this one is how quickly that kind of got exposed because there is some good information. There's good evidence that preparing to teach a concept to somebody makes you learn it better than just studying it for yourself. And the effect kicks in even before you actually teach anybody. Explaining something forces you to organize it, retrieve it, and notice exactly where your own understanding gets fuzzy, right? It's a different way of just trying to like guess the answer on the other side. So effectively doing it as a teaching thing is making you retrieve it in a slightly different way than effectively just pop quizzing yourself. And it's basically the fastest way to close the gap that we talked about earlier between feeling like you know something, so the confidence, and actually knowing something, which is your ability to produce it back. And so the engine behind it's something called the Feynman technique, and that explains a concept in plain language as if teaching a child, and the gap becomes obviously fast. And I think like what was neat about that one is I think that's basically explain it like you're five mentality, right? Like not like they're dumb, because there's a difference. And if you're a parent and you think explaining something like somebody's five is the same thing as explaining it like they're dumb, I'm going to ask you to pause and think about that for a minute. So, yes, like when you're doing this style of teaching, you should kind of have a little bit of that assumption that maybe they know nothing. And I did think it was cool that I did run into some coursework that did a little bit of this. Um, but yes, yeah, so you're anticipating having to teach the material like at the very baseline level. And that makes you retrieve even those simple concepts in a different way. So it because it does feel different preparing to teach something than it does preparing to quiz over something. So have you ever been put in a learn, do, teach where you felt like the teaching was actually what made it sink in, or effectively that preparing to teach it is what made it sink in better for you?
Ooh boy. To me, I would say the preparing probably was the best part for me. Yeah, don't have much to say
Yeah,
on that
nothing in
one.
particular,
Yeah.
but yeah, because I mean, I think I go back to like I heard that a lot. Like I'm trying to think back because I went to college like two different goes, right? So I had like a decent gap at one point between some of my college experiences, and that, lo and behold, was where that algebra class happened. And so, like, I don't actually recall being encouraged to teach in my younger years. I don't know if they're doing that now, but I do know at my second run when I went to Scottsdale Community, there was a little bit of effectively, you did that. Think about like your public speaking, like anytime they've had you do a presentation, right? And I can't help but think that that was the closest thing that we got to learn, do, teach. And even then, that's not really quite the same. Like, you really learn, do, present because teaching is not just standing and talking at people, right? I think we've learned that much. Like, teaching does actually involve a little bit more than merely presentation because presentation I would think would follow more of that read and reread. That's not activating parts of the hippocampus. That's not activating the retrieval process, right? But technically, it was better for the teacher to stand up there and just ask random students questions than just necessarily stand up there and regurgitate the same information over and over. So, yeah, basically, there was interesting studies. And again, we go back to Bjork. I know we mentioned him earlier, but this is out of Washington University in St. Louis, so UCLA. And these researchers had college students read text passages, telling half of them they'd be tested on the material afterwards, and telling the other half they'd have to teach it to another student. So this is just as easy as kind of cramming for a second, doing a pop quiz, or being told, hey, you need to teach this to somebody. But in reality, nobody actually taught anybody, by the way. Everyone was tested. So, ha ha, joke's on you. But students who'd been told to expect teaching recalled more of the passage, organized their recall more effectively, and remembered the most important points than the students expecting just a test. And I think that's really interesting because nothing about the study process changed except the students' mindsets, right? I believe they were given the same material, same time. They just got told to try to organize the information for a different task at the end of it. And then, wouldn't you know, the people who were ready to teach it that had found a different way of recalling it, right? Because that's really what you're doing. So I guess like what's kind of interesting is even if you're not going to teach it, granted, you can't do placebo effect on yourself because you know whether or not you're going to teach it at the end. But if you can try to find that same mentality of learning something to teach it instead of learning something to learn it, it'll actually help you learn it to learn it better, it turns out. So, a little bit of a brain hack in there of that's how it works. So if you cannot put yourself in I'm going to teach this, maybe you can find a way to replicate how you're trying to learn the information. And maybe that can help you too if you want to try to do this teach method of anything you're trying to learn.
Because it does sound like it's using a different part of the brain if you are, doing thinking of the mindset of teaching and not just getting the information to take a test later. Because, doing a test, it's just you and the paper. But, teaching, even if it's just giving a presentation, I would still consider that, teaching somewhat because you're, preparing that information to be able to say it out loud to people. That's, using different parts of the brain to get to that same point. And I could see to where that would make someone dive a little deeper into the material and be able to learn just a little bit.
Exactly. So there's your brain hack. It's find ways to retrieve it. You can even do that in your teaching method and protect your sleep. So these are the things that I feel like we can actively do that can help us with learning. And I guess like even to Tim's point, I do like the broader concept of this is more than just if you're sitting and learning in a classroom. These are ways you can protect your brain. If you genuinely like to think of yourself as a constant learner, like these things are important. And then I think that's going to beg the better question then is not only what can you do to improve your learning, but what are things that we might want to consider avoiding or getting rid of altogether, or at least just being aware of how we're using it, of things that might be negatively affecting our memory and our ability to learn. All right, so now we got to bring it back to the bubble that we don't live in of 2026, right? Because everything we just talked about, fluency versus real understanding, recognition versus recall, like this is basically the whole story of why short form education content. In other words, your TikToks, your reels and your shorts, like they feel so good, but yet teach so little on their own. Like nothing's going to stick, right? Like if we sit here and we think about it, like, okay, you are kind of switching between stuff because they're short form, right? And you do feel like that kind of pleasure trapness of like, oh, like this was easy digestible. But then if you're asked at the end of the day what you watched at all, or even if you learned anything, a lot of it is unlikely to stick, right? Because these videos are optimized to be smooth, fast, and interesting, which creates exactly the kind of fluency we talked about earlier. That feeling of, oh, yeah, I get this because this was easy to digest without requiring any of the effortful retrieval that actually builds a lasting memory. And that doesn't mean they're worthless, but it means they're doing a different job than people think they're doing. And by that, I guess I mean, like, have you ever, like, how much attention do you give your reels? I know you and I maybe are on Facebook a bit more than, say, TikTok or even YouTube for shorts. But, we all scroll down that are Facebook users and we see that little side reel of all the little things. So I'm just curious, like, did yours have they started hitting that trying to teach you something really fast thing?
I guess in some ways, yeah. Like in previous episodes, and I've sent you a link from this doctor before. There have been times to where the short little videos will come off where someone is talking, doing a reaction video to someone talking about like ingredients in food or whatever, and then the doctor in question comes back with, "Well, in reality, this is what this means," and like. to your point, when I watch it, it's like I feel informed. But if you ask me even the name of the ingredients that the initial person that the doctor is reacting to, what the ingredient was, I couldn't tell you. So it's like
Right.
I haven't learned anything, but it feels good watching it, if that makes sense. And it's like, yeah, it's like I'm not going to be a nutritionist. I'm not going to be a doctor. So, I'm not going to, beat myself up or anything like that for not necessarily knowing this type of information. But, I still think it's important to have, if you are going to be the type that does watch a reel, watch some that has some, actual information that they could be teaching you, and not just replays of Grand Theft Auto videos.
Exactly. Exactly. Because yeah, like for me, I get a lot of stuff that's like cooking stuff and then obviously some of the nerdy, some of the psychology stuff. But it goes back into, yeah, like it's almost kind of the same thing as when you're just absorbing some information, right? You're not necessarily pressing, you're not doing anything with the retrieval. And so essentially, the reason that these reels both feel good and they have some effects on us, I'm just going to kind of bullet point some reasons here so that we can kind of almost move through to wrapping this up. But right, because this is like how it almost kind of works against you. And I think one of the misconceptions we have is fluency versus like something actually being like material that's being taught. And what I mean by that is a well produced explainer can feel like real understanding without requiring any of that retrieval, application, or struggle, right? It's highlighting and rereading the problem in the video. So that's where that feels good, right? Like we've talked about how that can even sustain like a feeling of confidence or something. But there is a difference between a learning video that's a little bit more long form, as we've learned, typically works better, where the instructor takes those pauses and has you think. Whereas these reels and these shorts, when you think about it, is just some very smoothly delivered information. And granted, it's not always bad, right? Because a lot of this stuff, if you understand it correctly and kind of get that you're not truly learning in those moments, it can at least bring your attention to things that maybe you are interested in. So it's not useless. It's just not going to be as effective at teaching you something as you think. Because this even goes back to if you're not retrieving it, well, then your memory retention of what it was even teaching you could be poor. And this is where you can accidentally spread misinformation, even because it wasn't something that you re exposed yourself to, and it wasn't something that you did those practices that are so pivotal for retaining something efficiently and effectively. And so just understanding that they are what they are. They're really more of a little bit of a taster, right? It's going in and expecting to be served a meal, but it's really more of like a tasting of something. Like if you can take them as that, I think that's where it's like, oh, I can expose myself to new ideas. And that's still good. You're still exposing yourself to other people's explanations of stuff, but you're not going to be truly learning that information.
Yeah, and there is nothing wrong with that, so long as that is your expectation going in, and you're not fooling yourself into thinking that just because you watch these short little videos, you're somehow the expert. That's not you. Don't do that.
Right. And then, of course, obviously, there's a difference, and that fluency has to tie into this. There's a difference between recognition versus long term retention, right? Watching a video builds recognition level familiarity, which is like, it goes back into it feels good because you're retaining the information. It's that read and reread that still feels good. But a week later, most viewers can recognize a concept only if reminded, but can't reconstruct or explain it unprompted, which goes back to you're not bringing it back up, right? You're not retaining it like, oh yeah, I did watch that video and that was what they said, right? Or what if it's close enough and that person's a little bit off? So that's just one of those things to understand about it. And then I think the way that it really works against us, though, is it goes back into that cognitive load thing, right? Working memory has limited capacity. Fast cuts, on screen text, music, and narration happening simultaneously can overload working memory rather than support it, especially for genuinely new material, which is funny because that goes into I kind of leave my sound off for half of the reels that I watch. Like if you're not doing text for me to read, because I've gotten so annoyed with the same three background musics for like everything. Like we kind of go through trends and I just don't want to hear it anymore. If it's just loud and obnoxious, I don't want to hear it. Like, okay, you're not even reading to me. This is just something loud. And that's not necessarily good for how our brain absorbs information either. And so it even goes back into not is the video itself, if you do click on it and watch it, kind of an attack on cognitive load. We also now understand that when we choose not to watch videos and when we're constantly scrolling past things, that still chips at cognitive load because we're making decisions on what to do with information in front of us. So yeah, my sorry not sorry practice Facebook is when I see that little line of reels, I try so hard to be disciplined to just keep moving. Um, if I'm really bored, I might watch one or two. I think I have a one or two max, but I can't sit there and reel short form black hole like some people do.
Yeah, I've been guilty. I've been guilty.
Yeah. Well, and I think like something that's interesting is right. We brought up like the whole blocking and switching between, and I think it gives a false sense of that. Like if that was what I was like, hey, wouldn't that actually be good because I'm changing between information? But it's too fast, right? You're context switching and attention switching, and a lot of them are completely unrelated because when it's built around endless short videos, that's encouraging rapid switching between completely unrelated topics, right? There's a real cognitive cost that comes with re engaging deeply with a topic after an interruption. So it's actually better to maybe stick to one or two things and maybe pick something that you're interested in and spend some time learning. Or if nothing grabbed your fancy, just move on and keep checking your feeds for your uncle's passive aggressive political posts.
Thanks, Uncle
Technically
Frank. Yeah.
better for your brain. Yeah, technically better for your brain health than continuing down the real black hole. So I guess all that being said, it's fair the fair nuanced version of all of this is short form video can absolutely be a legitimate doorway into curiosity, right? Remember that information gap idea from not too long ago. A 30-second video can be exactly the thing that gets somebody to read a full book or ask a real question afterwards. But the evidence-based take isn't it's ruining our brains. Like, right? Like a lot of people want to say like social media is bad, this constant exposure is bad, it's all negative, right? But it's actually plausible to ramp up curiosity if you just understand what it's doing and not substitute it for real efforts, right? If you consider yourself a learner, please don't stop at short form reels. Use that to bait that curiosity and then get yourself some real learning on a specific topic, because hey, to be fair, that is what gets my attention sometimes, right? Like there's some pediatricians or some doctors that have come up in my reels and it's really made me go, hey, what about that topic? And then I've spun off and actually learned something. And then next thing you know, I'm being called, a leftist libtard because I'm sharing something that I learned about a study normally on our Facebook page.
Yeah, you've been
Oh
having a
no,
lot of fun.
sorry, I'm outdated. I sound vaxxed. That's the current way of saying that is that I sound vaxxed, apparently.
Yeah, I saw that too. Like, wow.
Yeah, you saw me going back and forth. But yeah, so if you remember one thing I think from this whole episode, it's this, right? If I may give like a major takeaway, it's that your brain doesn't learn from just exposure, right? It needs effort. You don't build muscle by just dead weight hanging on to some weights to your side, right? Like you have to actually strain and do some work. And every single thing we talked about today, like retrieval, difficulty, sleep, the ability to teach somebody, or even if you're tricking yourself into teaching yourself in that way, right? Even being wrong on purpose, question mark, or just being having a better attitude with being wrong. And that all points back to the same idea. The feeling of learning, fluency, recognition, and smoothness is often the opposite signal from what's actually happening. And the stuff that feels uncomfortable and slow in the moment is usually the thing doing the real work. And boy, howdy, does that not take you back to tortoise in the hare and like stuff like that, right? Like that doing the easy thing is often not the answer. I go back to there's ancient and there's old timey wisdom, and it's not all for nothing. And boy, it does kind of seem like we had somewhat of an understanding of how learning should work. That kind of seems to date back, even if there were missteps on formal education application.
Well, yeah, I mean, it didn't help over the past 20 years that, I think it was, to not go down the political route, unfortunately, but I think it was thanks to George W. Bush with, focusing more on having education focus more on testing, because if a certain school or a school district didn't reach certain testing numbers, they wouldn't get funding. So,
Yeah. And so,
that,
like, right,
yeah.
they're kind of trapped in their own situation too. And it goes back to, unfortunately, in America land, I think the biggest missteps in what's provided happens when it's focused too much on it being a business rather than the people it's supposed to be serving. Because even what's interesting is, listening to Pastor Brandon, I brought him up. If you're open to different religious folks trying to speak out that maybe anti-immigration policy is not so Christ-like, that's his brand is kind of challenging what the GOP has kind of taken over, from what the Bible actually says. So I've really, really dug him. Basically, I don't know. I like learning from different sources. There's a lot of good people out there, and I wish I had remembered what that tangent was. I don't know. We're at the tail end of our recording, and my cognitive load is depleted, I think, from learning about learning.
Yeah, more coffee, more coffee.
Right, which actually probably not such a good thing. Maybe I should go take a nap. I should have learned about this and had a really good solid nap before we went on. So,
Indeed. Indeed. Well, thank you for all that wonderful information today.
oh, yeah, I hope we all maybe gleaned something about learning and how it works. And that way, if either you have a vested interest because you're in school, going back to school, raising somebody that's going to school, or you're just trying to learn things and be a continual learner yourself. There are things we can do that's not just, well, figure out your learning style. There's little active things that you can do to prime your brain to just simply being better at learning and being open to learning.
Yeah, because you never really stop learning, even if it's something as simple as, crocheting or something like that. If you learn that skill, you can over time learn to do more than just a scarf. You
Oh
can,
yeah.
yeah, crochet all kinds of things. I never got past the scarf stage.
Oh, yeah, I did beanies. I've at least done beanies. I've done, actually, it was funny hanging out with my bonus son. I was walking along and there's like these people out with their little pamphlet thing. I forget what I think it was actually like an autism thing, but I've given to them before. So I just like say hi and like, keep going. And he had like this ditto Steffi. And I was like being a smart ass to my bonus, and I was like, mine looks cooler, the one that I crocheted for him, and it totally turned into this whole like, oh, you crochet? And I was like, well, here's my cool human card. You might want to look up how much a hand crocheted toy costs before you make me an offer on it. So I was like, he's like, dude, that's so cool. I'd take one. I was like, okay, you go look up how much a hand crocheted toy costs. But yeah, like I've loved like doing that because I've been trying to expand and learn more crochet stuff, and even like challenging your brain in that sense is good for the whole synopses and everything. So even if it's like a craft that you already do and are just learning something new to it, it's amazing how much better that feels, especially like when you realize that you're replacing that screen focus, that you're looking at the blue light thing, because there's that physical element of that too. And like how nice it feels to not do that and to pull things away, because yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff. um Duolingo, there's like things that you can use that stunt brain, that screen to like do good things at. But boy, there really just seems a lot to that it is good to put it down, put it away, play your music on speaker or earbuds that make it so you can put it away and not touch it. Because I think we're about ready just to start leaving our phones charging in another room at night. Because I think if I had to be super crazy honest of the thing that I say I want to be good at all the time that I'm pretty crappy at, it's like just leaving the phone down at night. Just leave it alone.
Yeah, I'm kind of like I think of that scene. I think it was one of the Beavis and Butthead Christmas specials, to where Butthead ended up turning off the TV, and then after like 5 seconds, Beavis goes, "No, turn it back on, turn it back on."
Right. And that's where it's like, yep, I leaned a little on needing my tablet today so I can give my bonus son a break from the high energy that is the toddler slash young boy, the baby reverend that can't make up his mind whether or not he wants to nap or no nap, driving everybody crazy up a wall. And that's where it's like, yeah, as awesome as he is, nobody is free. Nobody is completely free of the tantrum era, of the why did you think smacking something was a good idea era. So I don't know. I'm actually studying more neurology on that stuff. Because hey, like by the way, speaking of those reels being useful, that's where I learned about that the pod doc that I had sent you. That oh my god, parasocial moment, guys. Oh my gosh, she liked my comment. You know what I mean? But that stemmed from reels, and I would have never learned about that. There's this really great book that is actually kind of a continuation of something called The Whole Brain Child, which is older. So basically, this new author, and you have to forgive me because I don't remember his name right now. I don't want to get distracted on that one. But he did an interview on this podcast, and he has more or less written kind of the 2025 version of that book. And even something, the coolest thing that I picked up from his interview is learning that when a child is going through a temper tantrum, that when they're hooked up to all of the bells and dingers and measuring tools, it is effectively the same as an adult having a panic attack.
Ooh,
Right. So
yeah.
breathe. Maybe there's a reason that doesn't work. And so it's great. And what was refreshing from that, and we've already started it with the baby reverend because he's going through the tantrum phase right now, is there are tools for that. There's the color game. There's things that anchor logic and break your brain out of the emotional spiral when you're having an anxiety attack. And there's even some really promising studies of like just listening to certain frequencies. So this is all great news for parents. So I'm really excited, but that came from a reel. Now, did I learn everything I needed to learn? Obviously not. I can't even remember the author's name. But like that's where it's like it's kind of cool to see like some of the real life examples when we talk about stuff is, that was a neat one. So that's going to be the next book I probably side nerd about.
Well, if you think about it, though, I mean, I think the best way to, I think about reels would be to compare them to the people at Costco that have trays out with sample food. It's not the
Yes.
complete meal, but it gives you a taste. And if you like that taste, then you can dive in further.
Right. They're not going to give you the whole tray of that salsa verde enchilada, but there's going to be that little cup, and it's going to be just enough for you to determine maybe if you're interested in having the whole enchilada. I led myself up to a pun and I didn't even mean to.
There we go.
I like enchiladas. Apparently, I'm craving enchiladas, guys.
Now, before we wrap up, is the baby Reverend excited for the new Spider-Man movie?
Oh, yeah, we are going back and forth on whether we're going to take him to it because I go back to theaters are just loud. Like, I feel like they're a lot louder. Like, the last time we went, gosh, I really want to say my last, like, oh my gosh, this is crazy experience was taking my bonus son when Venom came out. Yeah, and I just remember him looking up at the Mr. Reverend and being like, "Can we go into the hall?" And just me and my bonus daughter, like, sat there and watched it, and they just kinda I think they dipped in and out. I don't remember how that went for them. I just remember it was just such the sweetest, most innocent because it was just way too loud. But the good news is I do have headphones for him, so I don't know, might try, because that is one of those things that unfortunately I don't think under X years is free for anybody. So I would be paying for 2 tickets to possibly stand in a hallway depending on how it is. But I guess I did learn that sometimes you can call theaters and ask if they have daytime showings that are at different sensitive hearing groups.
Yeah, well, that's good. Hopefully, he gets a
So,
chance
I
to
mean,
see.
it's not always a thing they offer, but apparently you can always call and ask if they're doing any like sensitive listening groups or anything like that. So,
Yeah, you want to
not a
be there with the
guarantee, but
elderly
something.
people.
Oh, well, I mean, sensitive hearing being the full ranges of it, right? Like the harder of hearing plus like the younger kids, and sometimes like people on certain ends of the spectrum, as it were, not having it super loud for some of them too, because that vibration can be quite upsetting for people with sensory.
Yeah.
So, but anywho, yeah, I'm hoping that we can go see it. If not all of us, I'm hoping the Mr. Reverend and my bonus son get to go. So, because we've been kind of Spider-Manning it, and I guess Andrew Garfield is going to be in it, and he's like one of my favorite actors. So, we'll see how it pans out. I'm still more of a thank you for the pandemic for showing us that we could just rent movies at home. But I do know I probably need to get these. I need to get dressed and this kid dressed and try to get some outside time before it gets too hot today.
Yes, and I got a bunch of bitches at work that are ready for me to deal with that. Oh, I love doing that. Like some of the male dogs too. Like if they make me mad, I would just be like, "You're a son of a bitch," and then because it's true. I'm not. It's not a curse. It's not an insult.
Here's what you need now. You just need a picture of you sitting with all the dogs around you, and it just says, "Bitches love me." I don't think they'll appreciate that social media post, so maybe don't actually do that. But you know.
Yeah. I think that one would get me in trouble. But anyway, anything else you want to say to our friends at home before we wrap things up?
No, I think just next time studying feels easy, that might not be a green light. Maybe it's a yellow flag. Just make sure if you're actually wanting to learn the information, you're finding your ways to retain it. And you know what? There is absolutely nothing wrong with cramming and just letting it go for stuff that doesn't matter for your long term stuff, right? Because I think that is one thing that I do want to kind of take away here is cramming is not useless. You just need to maybe use it more intentionally and use it to maybe save your long term cognitive load. But that's all. That's all I want to nerd out about. I don't know. I found it really fascinating to learn about learning.
Yes, and also get some sleep in, and don't take as much caffeine as I did in my 20s.
We need to cut caffeine and really protect our sleep, guys. Like more and more seems to be showing that it affects multiple facets of life. So protect your sleep, reduce your caffeine intake. I'll
Indeed.
be done being a boring doctor now.
Oh, stop that. Anyway, each week we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
But self-deprecation is my love language to myself, Tim. Don't take that from me.
And also nothing's going to beat the baby Reverend saying adieu from a couple weeks back.
Oh, no, we've got no better sign off than that one.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy
on YouTube Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify,
or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Bye, friends.